You won't believe what happened at my family's lake cabin recently. Something so wild, it feels like it came straight out of a TV drama. It all started when the HOA decided to show up unexpectedly, armed with what they called their master key, claiming they had every right to get inside. But here's the twist: their key didn't work. Not only that, but things took a shocking turn when they didn't just give up, they actually called 911. As if the situation was some kind of emergency. What they didn't realize was that my son, the sheriff, was nearby, and that fact would change everything. This story isn't just about a dispute over property or keys. It's about boundaries, authority, and the surprising ways family can step in when you least expect it. Imagine the tension rising as the HOA officers stood there, frustrated and confused, while I watched from a distance, knowing something bigger it was about to unfold. It's one of those moments where the everyday meets the unexpected, and you have to ask yourself, who really holds the power when rules and rights collide? What started as a simple visit from the HOA quickly spiraled into a standoff none of us saw coming. My son, wearing his badge, wasn't just going to let this slide without making sure everything was handled properly. But how would he handle it when family and official duties got tangled up in the mix? And what was the HOA's real motive behind forcing their way in? There's more to this story than just a broken key and a frustrated homeowner. I'm going to take you through everything that happened that day, the confusion, the confrontation, and the moments that left us all holding our breath. But before I get into all that, you need to hear how the whole situation began and why it quickly escalated into something none of us expected. Stay tuned, because the next part will reveal how my son's role as sheriff changed the entire game and why. This isn't over yet. To understand why the HOA showed up so unexpectedly at our lake cabin, you have to know a little about the history between us. We've owned this cabin for years, a place where my family and I escape from the noise of daily life. It's peaceful, private, and for the most part, respected by the neighborhood. But over the last few months, tensions had been rising between us and the HOA. There were disagreements about maintenance responsibilities, property lines, and some new rules they tried to enforce without much warning. Nothing that should have led to a dramatic showdown, but somehow it did. The HOA board had sent notices, but communication felt one-sided, like they were more interested in asserting control than finding any kind of compromise. I always believed in handling things calmly, but when they announced they'd be using a master key to access cabins for inspections, I was uneasy. It felt intrusive, especially because we had personal belongings and family memories inside. We never refused reasonable inspections, but the way they presented this master key policy felt like a power play. Then came the day everything came to a head. I was out running errands when I got a call that the HOA had arrived, expecting access. I rushed back, and that's when the awkward, tense moment unfolded. They tried their master key on our cabin door, but it simply wouldn't turn. We never gave them a copy of our key, and the lock had been changed a while back for our own security. That's when their patience ran thin, and they decided to call 911. As if this was some kind of lockout emergency or trespassing issue. Meanwhile, my son happened to be in the area on official duty. He wasn't involved at first, but when the call came in, he realized the stakes were higher than just a simple property dispute. What nobody knew was how deeply personal this would get once he arrived. His role as sheriff wasn't just a job. It was about protecting his family. The air was thick with tension, and every moment felt like it could tip the situation one way or another. What exactly would happen next? That part is coming up, but for now, the mystery is far from solved. As the situation grew more complicated, it became clear that the conflict wasn't just about a stubborn lock or a frustrated HOA board. There were layers to this story, with emotions and hidden motives swirling beneath the surface. From my perspective, the HOA's insistence on using that master key felt like a violation of our privacy and trust. It wasn't just a tool, it symbolized control, and for a place that means so much to us. That was hard to accept. On the other hand, the HOA members genuinely believed they were doing their job enforcing community rules that they thought everyone had agreed to. They saw the locked door as a roadblock to maintaining safety and standards in the neighborhood. They were convinced that calling 911 was the right move to keep things official and fair. It wasn't easy to see eye to eye when both sides felt justified, yet stubbornly opposed. My son, the sheriff, had a unique view on this. His job was to uphold the law, but his heart was with his family. When he arrived at the cabin, the tension between his professional duty and personal loyalty was palpable. He knew the law about property rights and HOA regulations, but he also understood the importance of respecting boundaries and privacy. This wasn't a simple call for backup. It was a delicate situation where every word and action could escalate or diffuse the conflict. Meanwhile, other neighbors were watching from a distance, whispering and taking sides. Some believed the HOA was overstepping, while others thought the cabin owners were being difficult. Rumors started spreading about previous disputes and past grievances, making it harder to separate fact from fiction. The community's harmony was at risk, and what began as a disagreement over a lock was threatening to divide people further. In the midst of all this, I kept wondering what was the real reason the HOA pushed so hard this time. Was it just about rules, or was there something else driving their urgency? As we all stood there, caught between frustration and confusion, one thing was clear: the story was far from over, and the next moves would be crucial. The air was thick with tension as my son stepped closer to the cabin, his sheriff's badge catching the fading light. Every face around was a mixture of frustration, uncertainty, and something heavier, something like fear of what might come next. The HOA members were growing impatient, their voices louder, their stances more rigid. They kept insisting that they had the legal right to enter, that ignoring their master key policy wasn't an option. But for us, it wasn't just about keys or policies. It was about trust, respect, and protecting our family's sanctuary. My son looked at me for a moment, and I saw that same conflicted feeling reflected in his eyes. This wasn't the kind of call he was used to, and yet he was determined to handle it the right way. He started explaining calmly to the HOA representatives about property laws, homeowners' rights, and the importance of following proper procedures. But the HOA seemed unwilling to back down, and I could see frustration mounting on both sides. Neighbors began to gather, sensing something big was unfolding. Some whispered about past conflicts we'd had with the HOA, others about the authority my son carried as sheriff. The mix of emotions in the crowd made it clear this wasn't just a private family matter anymore. It was becoming a neighborhood spectacle. Rumors and tension fed off each other, and suddenly, what should have been a simple visit was spiraling into a standoff. Then, just as my son was about to suggest a way to de-escalate the situation, one of the HOA members made a sudden move toward the door, trying the master key again, more forcefully this time. The lock refused to budge, but the act itself sparked a sharp reaction from everyone. Voices rose, tempers flared, and I could feel the moment teetering on the edge. It was clear that whatever happened next would decide everything: our families, peace, the HOA's authority, and maybe even the future of the neighborhood. With my heart pounding, I watched as my son prepared to step in, ready to protect what mattered most. The tension was unbearable, and the air felt electric, like the calm right before a storm. What would happen next? The answer was just moments away. But for now, the uncertainty held us all captive, just when it felt like the situation couldn't get any more intense. Something unexpected happened that changed everything. As my son moved to firmly address the HOA member, trying the key again, a voice rang out from the edge of the crowd, a neighbor I hadn't seen much before, someone who had been quietly watching the whole time. He stepped forward and dropped a bombshell. He claimed there had been secret meetings within the HOA. Decisions made behind closed doors that nobody else knew about. According to him, the push to enforce this master key policy wasn't just about inspections or community standards. It was tied to a bigger plan that could affect not only our cabin, but several others around the lake suddenly. The whole atmosphere shifted. The HOA board members exchanged nervous glances, and my son's calm authority met a new layer of complexity. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was about power, control, and hidden agendas that threatened the entire neighborhood's peace. The neighbor's revelation raised the stakes and made everyone question the true motives behind the HOA's aggressive tactics. On top of that, I noticed a few other faces in the crowd that hadn't been there earlier, people who seemed to have their own interests in the situation. Whispers of possible property sales, changes to access rights, and even rumors of development plans surfaced quietly but ominously. It was like a puzzle with pieces nobody wanted to lay out fully, and the tension twisted tighter around us, my son. The tension reached a boiling point as my son stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. He addressed the HOA members directly, making it clear that breaking into the cabin without proper legal authority would cross a line, one that could lead to serious consequences. He reminded everyone that while the HOA had a role in maintaining community standards, that role didn't give them the right to override property laws or violate privacy. The crowd hushed, the weight of his words sinking in, then pulling out his phone. My son revealed something that turned the whole situation on its head. He showed them a series of emails and documents that had been quietly gathered over the past weeks, proof that some members of the HOA board had been pushing to seize properties under the guise of community improvement to sell them off for development. It was a scheme to increase their profits at the expense of homeowners like us. Faces paled as the evidence unfolded, and the confident facade of the HOA leaders crumbled with the proof in hand. The sheriff made it clear that any further attempts to force entry would be met with legal action. The crowd began to disperse, the conflict cooling but leaving a trail of distrust behind. For a moment, it seemed like justice had been served and our family's peace was restored. But just when I thought it was over, a quiet voice caught my attention from the back. It was the neighbor who had first revealed the secret meetings. With a nervous glance around, he leaned in and whispered something that sent a chill down my spine. "You think this was the end? There's more going on behind the scenes things. Even the sheriff doesn't know yet." The realization hit me hard. This was bigger than just our cabin or the HOA's bad decisions. Something deeper was at play, something that could change everything again. As the sun dipped below the trees and the crowd finally faded away, I knew one thing for sure: this story was far from finished, and the next chapter would be even more unexpected. After that day, things slowly began to settle, but the impact of what happened at the lake cabin stayed with us. The HOA board members involved in the shady scheme were confronted with the evidence, and an official investigation was launched. My son continued his work, balancing his role as sheriff with protecting our family's privacy and rights. The neighborhood, once divided by suspicion and rumors, started to come together, realizing how important transparency and trust really are. Looking back, I'm reminded how quickly ordinary situations can spiral into something much bigger. What started as a simple conflict over a master key and a locked door revealed deeper issues about power, respect, and the lengths some will go for control. It taught me that standing up for your rights isn't just about protecting property. It's about protecting the sense of safety and belonging that makes a house a home. The unexpected twist, the secret plans, and the involvement of the HOA board showed us all the importance of paying attention to what's really going on behind the scenes. It also highlighted the strength of family, especially when my son, as sheriff, stepped in not just as an officer of the law, but as a son protecting what mattered most. Though this chapter has closed, the lessons remain clear. Stay vigilant. Communicate openly, and never underestimate the power of standing together as a community. Our lake cabin is safe again, but the experience left us stronger and more connected than ever. Thanks for following along this story. There's always more beneath the surface than you might expect.